on the various aspects of our efforts to combat hate crimes and hate incidents. We live at a time when toxic misinformation, unleashed hate, and harsh vitriol spread with dangerous speed and at a fever pitch. Our panel on online hate today is exactly the kind of new light we need to better identify and address these harms. Another panel today focuses on alternatives to criminal prosecution, particularly in the case of hate incidents. While the department will continue its robust prosecution of hate crimes, we are also looking at how we can deploy all of the tools in our arsenal to counter the upsurge in hate incidents that may not rise to the level of criminality. We also spend some time today better understanding the FBI's hate crime statistics for 2020. As you may know, there was a significant increase in reported hate crimes, which are acts of hate that not only target individuals, but also reverberate throughout entire communities. These numbers reflect an unacceptable reality. One of our goals for today's conference is to contribute to an important ongoing dialogue around the scourge of hate crimes and hate incidents occurring across the country. We aim to do this by uplifting the voices of those who work near this issue and spotlighting those advocates with lived experiences who can learn from today. Our conference explores what justice means for the targets of hate crimes and what remedies are available to those targeted in hate-fueled incidents. At the conclusion of today's program, we hope you feel more prepared to take the tangible ideas, strategies, and resources mentioned here back to your personal and professional spaces. We also hope that you find inspiration from today's speakers to continue on your journeys of confronting hate. Before we begin, however, let me briefly go over a few housekeeping items. First, we will be using the Zoom platform's chat function as a mechanism for the department to make important announcements to participants. Please be sure to check for messages in the chat during today's program. Second, the audio and video functions for participants will remain off for the duration of today's program, from now until 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Lastly, this event is being recorded. We received a Privacy Act notice from us concerning the collection of information during today's program. That statement is being shared in the chat with you now. And with that, we are ready to begin our program. To get us started today, the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick B. Garland, will deliver the opening remarks. The Attorney General has made combating hate crimes and hate incidents one of the department's top priorities. Shortly after he was confirmed as the 86th Attorney General of the United States, he issued a directive to Justice Department employees to determine how we can increase resources through better training, support, and outreach to state and local partners. Under his leadership, preventing, deterring, and responding to unlawful acts of hate has become a critical part of this agency's work. Please watch the following video message from Attorney General Merrick B. Garland.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us for this important event, Confronting Hate, Strategies for Prevention, Accountability, and Justice. We always welcome the chance to gather with community leaders and civil rights advocates. These forums give us a chance to learn from one another. This particular convening will allow us to take stock of where we are and where we need to go in our joint fight against hate. I want to thank Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark for her leadership, for her long-standing commitment to this task, and for bringing us together today. This Thursday marks the 12th anniversary of the enactment of the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. As you well know, the act is named after two innocent victims of heinous crimes that occurred in 1998. Matthew Shepard, 21-year-old student at the University of Wyoming, was robbed, tortured, tied to a fence along a country road, and left to die by two men who offered him a ride home from a local bar. James Byrd Jr., a 49-year-old African-American man living in Jasper, Texas, also accepted a ride home from strangers. They drove him to the remote edge of town where they beat him, tied him by the ankles to the back of a pickup truck, and dragged him to his death. The investigation into Matthew Shepard's death found strong evidence that his attackers targeted him because he was gay. The three men responsible for killing James Byrd Jr. were well-known white supremacists. But while the men responsible for these killings were later convicted of murder, none was prosecuted for committing a hate crime. At the time, federal hate crime protections did not include violent acts based on the victim's sexual orientation. Existing laws also only covered racial violence against those engaged in a federally protected activity, such as voting or attending school. The landmark legislation bearing James and Matthew's names greatly expanded the federal government's ability to prosecute hate crimes. The law enables the Justice Department to prosecute crimes motivated by race, color, religion, and national origin without having to show that the victim was engaged in a federally protected activity. The act also empowers the department to prosecute hate crimes committed because of a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. We are honored to be joined later in the program by Matthew's parents, Judy and Dennis, and James' sister, LaVon. The law named for their loved ones has made an enormous difference in DOJ's ability to prosecute and deter acts of hate. The passage of the Hate Crimes Prevention Act in 2009 is an integral part of an important legacy. The Justice Department was founded during Reconstruction to enforce the rights promised by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. This required confronting the racist conduct of the Ku Klux Klan and others who used terror and violence to keep African Americans from exercising their civil rights. Though the Justice Department's work to address unlawful acts of hate has a deep history, it remains an immediate and pressing charge that constantly requires new thinking. That is why my first directive as Attorney General was to order an internal review to determine how the department could deploy all the tools at its disposal to counter the rise in hate crimes and hate incidents. While that review was nearing completion, Congress passed another piece of anti-hate legislation, the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act and the Jabara Hire No Hate Act. In light of our internal review and that new law, the Justice Department is taking a number of steps to enhance our ability to combat unlawful acts of hate. Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco and Associate Attorney General Vanita Gupta are ensuring that the department improves incident reporting, increases law enforcement training and coordination at all levels of government, prioritizes community outreach, and makes better use of civil enforcement mechanisms. As part of our efforts, we assigned a Deputy Associate Attorney General to lead and coordinate the department's anti-hate crime and incident resources. Rachel Rossi is serving as the department's inaugural anti-hate coordinator, and I am glad you will have the opportunity to hear from her later today. Pursuant to my directive and the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, the Civil Rights Division is also expediting its review of federal hate crimes. Over the past 6 months, the department has charged more than 17 defendants with federal hate crimes, including in the death of Ahmaud Arbery. We have also secured convictions in a number of notable hate crime cases. For example, in 2019, a shooter killed 1 and wounded 3 others at a synagogue in Southern California. The defendant then set fire to a nearby mosque. Last month, that defendant pleaded guilty to all 113 counts and agreed to spend life in prison without parole. The Justice Department will continue to use its criminal enforcement tools effectively, but we understand that our work must go beyond criminal prosecutions. So we are also hard at work maximizing the use of our non-criminal resources. For example, I have directed the establishment of a full-time language access coordinator within the department. In doing so, we hope that improved language access will improve people's willingness and ability to report their experiences with hate. In another example of non-criminal action, The Civil Rights Division recently worked with the Department of Education to identify resources for students and families facing pandemic-related harassment. In keeping with our language commitment, that product was translated into several languages. In addition, the department has prioritized revitalizing the Community Relations Service, and I am glad that you will have a chance to meet our CRS acting director later today. A few weeks ago, I hosted a listening session with Secretary of Health and Human Services Becerra. The purpose of that event was to help shape guidance aimed at raising awareness of hate crimes during the pandemic. That session was yet another reminder of the painful and profound ways that bias-motivated violence harms entire communities. At the Justice Department, we are committed to using every tool at our disposal to address unlawful acts of hate. We are grateful to call you partners in this effort. This work is not easy, but it is essential. Thank you for joining us today and for all that you do to confront hate.
Welcome back, and thanks to those just joining us. Hello for the first time. Today's agenda for the Confronting Hate Conference will be shown intermittently during our program. To follow along in your office or at home, we are sharing the schedule in the chat with you now. As Attorney General Garland mentioned, this is the 12th anniversary since the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act was signed into law by President Barack Obama on October 28, 2009. The bill named hate crimes for what they are, a national problem that affects not just victims, but entire communities. The bill also dramatically expanded what the Justice Department could do to help ensure substantial justice and eradicate bias-motivated violence. Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Kristen Clark, will guide us through a question and answer discussion of the legacies of Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. and the organizations bearing their names. Assistant Attorney General Clark currently leads the Justice Department's federal civil rights enforcement efforts. She has focused her entire career on fighting for racial justice and civil rights. She started her career right here in the Civil Rights Division before joining the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, and subsequently leading the Civil Rights Bureau of the New York State's Attorney General's Office and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law. She is joined by James Byrd Jr.'s sister, LaVon Harris, and Matthew Shepard's parents, Judy and Dennis Shepard. We thank them for joining us today and for their steadfast work in advocating for change.
Thanks so much, Louis. I want to welcome and thank everyone who is able to join us for this incredible panel. I'm truly honored to be able to sit here today to introduce to you the incredible panelists. I know that we will get into more details about their stories, but we have Dennis and Judy Shepard. They are the parents of Matthew Shepard, board members and founders of the Matthew Shepard Foundation. And we're also joined by LaVon Byrd Harris, the sister of James Byrd, and the president of the Byrd Foundation for Racial Healing. I've had the privilege of working with all three of them throughout the years. I want to thank them for sharing their stories, and thanks to all of you who are watching today. The Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act, signed by President Barack Obama 12 years ago, is an important and powerful tool for confronting hate in our country. This landmark legislation was named after Matthew Shepard, a 21-year-old student at the University of Wyoming who was gay, and James Byrd Jr., a 49-year-old Black man living in Jasper, Texas. Both were tragically murdered in acts of unspeakable violence and hate. This hate crime law increased the jurisdiction of the FBI and the Justice Department to investigate bias-motivated violence and added gender and gender identity-based violence to the list of hate crimes. It also removed unnecessary barriers to prosecuting hate crimes committed because of race, color, or national origin, and gave the Justice Department new tools for prosecuting criminals. It is a law that we are putting to work each and every day at the Justice Department to confront the escalating rates of hate crimes and hate violence that we are seeing across the country. The law has helped to ensure that those who commit hate crimes are held accountable, allowing all Americans to live more freely and openly. Both the Shepard and Byrd families were there for the White House signing, and I want to now turn to them. If I could start with you, Dennis and Judy, for those, especially young people who may not know the story of what happened to your son, Matthew, in 1998, share a little bit with us about Matthew and who he was and how you came to the work that you are undertaking today.
Well, Matt was a 21-year-old school in Laramie, Wyoming, at the university. He was a giant of a person, 5'2", 105 pounds. He spoke 5 languages, was taking a 6th one when we lost him. He liked to hunt and fish, ride horses, the theater, politics especially. His goal and dream was to work overseas for the State Department, try and bring the same rights, responsibilities, and privileges that he thought he had here in America to other countries. And the way the foundation started was while Matt was in the hospital, we started receiving donations to help defray the medical costs. And we just couldn't do that. We thought that was our responsibility. And Judy and I and our younger son decided that the best thing to do would be to take that money and use it to help his community, the LGBTQ community. And so we started the foundation. It started on December 1st. His birthday, his 22nd birthday in 1998. And it immediately went crazy with people supporting it, because Judy was emphasizing the fact that it wasn't just the LGBTQ community that was important in this. It was all the marginalized communities, because they're all, the intersectionality was such that you were more than one person. You're in different groups. So it's important that we emphasize that and start pushing in that direction.
And LaVon, I want to turn to you next. Your brother, James Byrd, was tortured and brutally killed in Texas a few months before the attack on Matthew Shepard. Please tell us about how you remember your brother and what most helped you and your older brothers and sisters and your parents in the days and weeks following his murder.
James, he was older brother. He was very protective of his family, outgoing, loved his music, loved to be with people. He was a people person, entertainer, piano, all-rounded person. And we loved his family. And to see him the day before, we thought all was well with the world. You know, I look forward to seeing more times with him, never knowing that day before that I would never see him again. And what really taunts me about that day is that if only if he was born in another race, he'd be 70 years old today, enjoying his family and his grandkids. But being of a Black ethnic race, they didn't look at him as a person, they looked at him as a Black man. And that's all they were looking for. And that's kind of pain, it's kind of hard to hear because he had no choice to be born where he was born, but he was remembered as being an outgoing person. And what helped us was the community, local community. The small towns like Jasper, Texas, everybody's segregated. And me living in Jasper, I can't experience ever a white individual come into my home.